allow me to set the stage. Whispering Pines was a remote cabin nestled deep in the heart of the thick, ancient forest. My friends and I had heard rumors about the cabin, stories of strange happenings and inexplicable events, but we brushed them off as mere campfire tales. How wrong we were. The journey began on a crisp autumn afternoon as we drove deeper into the wilderness. I remember the twisted trees casting eerie shadows and the silence that clung to the air like a dense fog. By the time we reached the cabin, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving us shrouded in darkness. We settled into the cabin, hoping to unwind and forget about the world beyond the woods. But that's when the nightmare began. Odd sounds emanated from the forest, like whispers carried on the wind. At first, we dismissed them as the rustling leaves and creaking branches. We laughed nervously, trying to convince ourselves that we were just spooked. As night fell, we lit a fire in the fireplace, hoping it would ward off the unsettling cold that had settled around us. We told stories and laughed, trying to forget the disturbing sounds. But with each passing hour, those whispers grew louder, more distinct, and impossible to ignore. I could hear my friends huddled together, their eyes reflecting fear as they exchanged horrified glances. Then, the lights flickered and died, plunging us into absolute darkness. Panic set in, and we fumbled for flashlights. The cabin seemed to groan as if bearing some heavy secret. Whispers turned into murmurs, forming words that sent shivers down our spines. They seemed to be speaking to us, warning us, taunting us. We gathered by the window, peering into the blackness outside. That's when we saw them, shadowy figures moving in the woods. The whispering intensified, and the feeling of being watched became overpowering. It was as though the forest itself had come alive, and it was hungry for something. As the night wore on, our fear grew unbearable. We huddled together for warmth and safety. The whispers taunted us with personal secrets and dark confessions, as if the forest knew our deepest fears. It was clear that we were not alone, and that whatever dwelled in those woods meant us harm. We were trapped, surrounded by an unknown terror that seemed to feed on our fear. The cabin's walls shook, and the whispering grew louder, almost deafening. We had no choice but to make a desperate run for it. Clutching our flashlights, we fled into the night, away from the sinister presence of Whispering Pines. Miraculously, we made it to our car and sped away from that cursed place. The whispers followed us for a while, fading as we put distance between us and the cabin. My friends and I have never been the same since that night. We escaped with our lives, but the horrors we witnessed haunt us to this day. I share this story now as a warning to anyone who might be tempted to visit Whispering Pines. There are places in this world where darkness runs deep, where the very earth itself holds a malevolent presence. I survived to tell the tale, but I cannot erase the horrors of that night from my memory. Be cautious, for the forest has secrets, and they may not be content to remain hidden forever. I've never been one to believe in the supernatural. Growing up, I scoffed at ghost stories and urban legends, dismissing them as mere tales told around campfires to scare us. That was until I found myself entangled in a nightmarish ordeal I can hardly put into words. Now, I sit here, writing this, with trembling hands, still haunted by the memories of that accursed cabin in the woods. My name is Emma, and at the time, I was a 28-year-old writer, always on the lookout for an exciting adventure. I had decided to take a break from my urban life and escape to a remote cabin nestled deep within the woods of northern Maine. It seemed like the perfect opportunity to find inspiration for my next novel, a thrilling tale of survival. Little did I know, I would end up writing the most horrifying story of my life. The cabin, though rustic, had an eerie charm to it. Surrounded by towering pine trees and the ever-encroaching wilderness, it was a place where the silence was so profound it could drive a person mad. I arrived with the intention of spending a few weeks alone, a notion that filled me with equal parts excitement and unease. The first week passed uneventfully. I wrote during the day, sipped hot cocoa by the fire at night, and marveled at the brilliance of the stars. But then, during the second week, things took a sinister turn. One evening, I heard it, a faint, distant sound in the woods. It was like the mournful wail of a lost soul, carried on the frigid wind. I tried to dismiss it as a mere trick of my overactive imagination, but the sound grew louder, drawing closer to the cabin. Panic welled up inside me as the unnerving cry reverberated through the darkened forest. I had no choice but to lock all the doors and windows and clutch my phone like a lifeline. The wind howled outside, making the cabin groan and creak in response. I felt like a helpless child wrapped in the suffocating embrace of isolation. I tried calling for help, but there was no signal. My only connection to the outside world was severed, leaving me utterly alone. Hours passed, and the sound outside grew louder and louder. Shadows danced in the corners of the room, and whispers, soft and insidious, slithered through the walls. The cabin itself seemed to come to life, its wooden beams groaning with an ominous resonance. Then it happened. In the dim light of a flickering candle, I saw a figure standing in the cabin's corner. It was a silhouette, indistinct yet undeniably human. My heart pounded in my chest, and my voice caught in my throat as I stared, paralyzed by fear. The figure began to move, its movements erratic and unnatural. It shuffled towards me, and I could hear its labored breathing, heavy and filled with anguish. As it drew closer, I noticed its eyes, hollow sockets that seemed to swallow the very light around them. In that moment, I knew I had to escape. With all the strength I could muster, I bolted for the door, tearing it open and running into the forest. The night was alive with haunting noises, but I didn't stop. I ran until I found a road, and a passing car stopped to rescue me. Now, I'm here, writing this tale as a warning to anyone who might consider seeking solitude in a cabin in the woods. I survived, but I'm forever changed. I will never forget the terror that gripped me that night, the presence that stalked me, and the haunted cabin that still stands deep within the woods, waiting for its next victim. My name is Sabrina, and I've never been one to believe in the supernatural. I'm an analytical person, a scientist by trade, and have always relied on logic to explain the world around me. But there are things that can't be explained away with reason, and my terrifying experience in that cabin in the woods is one of them. It all started when I decided to take a break from my busy life and escape to a remote cabin deep in the heart of the woods. I'd heard stories about the place from my friends, tales of it being haunted, cursed, and avoided by the locals. Of course, I dismissed these stories as mere urban legends, thinking they were nothing more than campfire tales meant to scare children. As I arrived at the cabin, the remote wilderness embraced me. Tall, ancient trees loomed overhead, casting eerie shadows that danced in the twilight. The cabin itself was old and dilapidated, its wooden walls worn and weathered. An unsettling chill ran down my spine, but I brushed it off as a simple reaction to the desolation around me. The first night was relatively uneventful. I lit a fire, read a book, and felt a sense of peace. But as the days passed, strange occurrences began to unfold. Footsteps echoed through the cabin when I was sure I was alone, and whispers seeped through the walls. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination running wild, but my rationality couldn't explain the handprints that appeared on the frosty window pane, each one unnervingly long and slender. My nights grew restless as sleep eluded me. Each night I heard a haunting melody, soft and distant, as if carried by the wind. It was as if the very forest itself sang a mournful, ghostly tune. I began to doubt my decision to come here, alone and isolated from the world, and wished for the return of the bustling city I had temporarily left behind. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I saw something that shattered my skepticism and filled me with an inexplicable terror. From the window, I watched shadowy figures emerging from the woods, their movements slow and deliberate, their eyes empty voids. They drew closer to the cabin, and as they did, the cabin itself seemed to groan in protest, its walls contorting and creaking. I huddled in a corner, heart pounding, as the apparitions entered the cabin. They moved in and out of the walls, their whispers growing louder and more distinct. I couldn't comprehend their language, but their voices carried a sense of anguish and malevolence that made my skin crawl. The room grew unbearably cold, and I could see my breath fogging up the air. I thought my end was imminent. I sat there silently for hours, not daring to make any movement or noise. But then, as dawn broke, the spirits retreated, their figures dissipating like smoke, leaving me shaken but alive. With trembling hands, I gathered my things and fled from that cursed cabin. The relief of the sun's warmth on my skin was overwhelming. I knew I had to share this story, to warn others about the malevolent presence that resides in that cabin. I write this now, my fingers still shaking as I relive the horror of those nights. I have no doubt that the cabin is haunted by something far beyond our comprehension, something that defies all rational explanation. If you ever stumble upon a cabin deep in the woods, remember my story and stay far, far away. The terror that lurks there is real, and it's waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to cross its path.